Well, thanks everybody for joining us today on this lovely first day of April. April Fools, everybody. This is all serious, though. We won't be making too many jokes throughout, I hope.
No.
Um, yeah, we're here to talk about capturing and tracing factory data. So it will be pretty nerdy for those of you that are recovering engineers like myself. I'm Bryan Bauw, the COO of PICO. Steve, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Steve Tebbetts. I'm the owner of Steam Services, which is a manufacturing engineering consulting firm that I put together after 30 plus years in manufacturing and living the ups and downs of automotive interiors. I'll say that I'm a survivor of that. So,
I love it.
and from now I want to share insights. I want to help as many people as I can.
I appreciate you joining me today. So
Sure.
for those of you that are new to our webinar, Steve's going to take you through most of the details. I'll ask a few interesting questions. We did receive a couple questions in the lead up to the event. We will be addressing those at the end. Also, we have a couple poll questions. So for those of you that are still listening, we'd really like you to be engaged. It'll help us kind of steer our conversation as to like how do this capturing data impacts shop floors once you answer those questions. So appreciate any active participation you can do as we go. So let's dive in a little bit. A little bit of background. Everybody that's on the discrete side of manufacturing knows that shop floors can get quite chaotic, particularly once you start the IoT Industry 4.0 journey, whatever your buzzword is that you want to throw at that. You can have a high mix of devices. There's lots of software sets that are out there to solve all of the problems. A lot of times there's no central data lake that comes along with that. And the piece that really resonates for me, and why I'm glad Steve has joined me, is people think that Industry 4.0 or the future of manufacturing looks like what's on the left, where you have robots doing everything and they just completely displace the people. Most of manufacturing is like what's on the right. 70+% of manufacturers are still have some level of human integration into their process throughout their lines. And so it's all about how do you engage with those people to capture that data. So with that, I'd love to dive in a little bit, Steve. Talk us through what traceability is and why you need it.
Yeah, so when I think about the question of traceability, I break it down into two main areas. One, internally, what's it going to do for you, and externally, what it's going to do for you. So from an internal standpoint, think about it as like a roadmap for your process. You wouldn't take a trip without GPS. So
I'm glad you didn't
uh,
say roadmap because I don't even know what that
yes.
is.
So and it's signposts along the way. It's points of interest. It's an exit that you're supposed to take. That's think of it that way. And then it helps create in your manufacturing process. It creates those start and stop points, especially from a quality control standpoint. Yeah, it just really focuses a troubleshooting effort, and along the way you're capturing critical data that you can use for process improvement. And yeah, like I said, critical process data, it's capturing the hows and the whens. You need to fill in the whys. So anyway, and then from an external standpoint, yeah, think about um, a a uh, a standpoint of it demonstrates customer commitment to quality, or it demonstrates to your customers a commitment to quality and process control. Um, it it definitely fosters better customer service because you can trace right back to a specific time, a specific place, operator, material, whatever. And overall, it just fosters peace of mind.
I love it. Being a lean guy, like I said, I'm a
Mhm.
recovering industrial engineer. It very much echoes the same reasons people do value stream mapping. And so, for those of you
Yes.
that are familiar with that, creating a traceability map, at least in my world, feels very similar with a lot of the similar overlap. So, can you
Yeah.
walk us through a little bit of like how you take your customers through creating a traceability map?
Sure. Sure. So in this slide here, this for those of us that have lived ISO and TS 16949, AS 9100. I mean, this kind of stuff is a given. right? But this is actually a process flow map that I put together to make the current model aviator top panel. But what this is a foundational type of planning document. You're laying out your process, you're laying out start to finish, right? From material coming in the door to finished goods going out the other door. What kind of processes are you going to use? And what kind of critical information, inputs and outputs are happening in that process, and what do you need to capture? If you look down the right side, I was actually making a running log of at this step we need to capture this, at this step we need to capture this.
How long does it generally take you to put something like that together, and how
I
big a
mean,
team?
yeah, for somebody who has a lot of experience in whatever process it is, I mean, you can do this in. I used to sit down with a team of 2 or 3, and we would do something, on a draft basis in an afternoon. Really,
Okay.
I mean, this is, over time you develop it, you clean it up, you pretty it up a little bit, but this is the kind of information that then feeds into your risk analysis. We all affectionately known that as a FEMA, right? But
Yep.
I mean, that's more formal, right? But some sort of risk analysis and some sort of control plan for how you're going to process. I mean, so this is a very foundational document, and I just
How
really
often do you
encourage.
revise it?
So, that's a good, I would say this got revised at, at the outside, it got revised every year because we were making some sort of process improvement. We were having to add a new feature, take a feature away, add a new color, something like that, right? So we were always going back to it. And then if there was a failure in the process, like at a foundational level, right? We're like, okay, let's go back. What did we miss? Right. But if you don't have something like this, you're guessing.
Right. Well, let's dive in a second into some of the
Sure.
kind of key elements to that. But next, we'd love some engagement with our audience here. We have a couple poll
Mhm.
questions. Like I said, we'd love to get some of your feedback. So we're going to pop our first question up here so you can help guide Steve and I today on our conversation. In your facility? Are you using paper methods, manual methods? Are you using spreadsheets or shared databases? Are you a little
Mhm.
more advanced on the early technology, using barcodes, RFIDs, which are actually quite a wide spectrum of capability? Or do you not track any of your systems? To be fair, I've been in those plants before and they still can be operating pretty efficiently, but
For sure. Okay. Interesting. That's encouraging. Spreadsheets and shared databases, I see. Overwhelmingly. A few of you have implemented barcodes and RFIDs. So, are you there, Brian?
oh, did you lose me?
I did. Somewhere along the way I lost you.
Yeah,
Anyway,
my
yes.
Wi-Fi just dropped. That's the fun of living out in the countryside, is it occasionally pulls on you. Did we get the answers to the poll questions up,
We
Chance?
did. Yeah, overwhelmingly, 44%. It looked like spreadsheets and shared databases.
Okay,
Um,
so people are doing a good job starting collecting some data,
mhm.
and we can kind of go
Yep,
from there off of that. Let me get myself reset up here after everything died.
sure.
So as they're starting to add information into those spreadsheets and kind of thinking through a little bit more database structure, we had a good question come in. We'll talk a little bit about databasing at the
Mhm.
end. What do you see are kind of some of the key elements of traceability and what needs to be captured? Walk us
Sure.
through the high level.
So at a high level, yeah, you're going to want to from an employee engagement standpoint, operator badges, an employee number, something like that. And then, take it one step further, the equipment that they're using, be it a welder, be it a torque device, whatever, but you want to start capturing some of the inputs and the outputs of that process. And then, you take it then one step further, and did you shoot all the screws you were supposed to? Did you run it at the right temperature? So there's some process conformance type outputs that you're going to be wanting to capture. And then that the data stream, and I can tell you there is a constant river of data in your manufacturing process. And it's just how much do you want to dip in a toe and grab that information. But the important thing is that data needs to be contextualized. And what that means is we tie it back to a specific operator, to a specific work cell, to a specific injection molding machine, whatever, right? But that's what contextualization is.
I heard a random fact at a conference a couple months ago, and they were talking about the fact that manufacturing creates 8 times more data than any other industry in the United States. And you think about that, that's just, you're up against healthcare, you're up against retail. I feel like they use their data a lot more than manufacturers do in mass.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity that kind of comes along with that.
Oh, yeah. I like to think of it as the Matrix, right? You see all those ones and zeros and alphanumerics.
I love it.
Yes.
Walk us through some of the things that can be captured.
Yeah, this is where I have a lot of fun here, right? So for the types of things that we're going to capture, again, your team needs to be thinking about what kind of data do you need to capture, inputs and outputs at every process. So you're going to be looking at things like material lot information, or a serial number at the start of a process, an operator number, a pass fail result. That can be as simple as a 1 or a 0. You're going to be wanting to capture another barcode off of, if you're installing a component at this process and screwing it down, maybe like a wire harness or something like that. You're going to want to capture that information, right? This part went in this part, that type of thing. And then, I talked about, key process output. So you're going to be looking at like mass, when I injection molded this part, does it weigh the right amount? I mean, that's a very basic way of quality control for injection molding.
Why don't you take us a little bit deeper? I think our next slide talks a little bit about that and what should be captured at kind of these steps. So we looked at all those different types of devices. This is kind of what leading back to your map at the beginning. How do people think about what should be captured from each of those steps as they kind of do their map?
Yeah. For me, it always started with a like date and time, and and I would usually start off a process by creating a serial number, a specific number tied to that part.
How early? That's the other question we get a lot.
It would invariably, it would be, in fact, it's interesting. If this was a process that had multiple components that then kind of came together in a final assembly, I would be kicking off serial numbers for each component at the very first process. And at that process, then in fact, the creation of the serial number, I always started with a Julian date for people that don't know. Like today would be the Julian date for today, April 1st, is 25/091. And that's not a number that's going to repeat until 100 years from now. So
that's fair. That's very smart. Yeah, we used to.
Yeah.
I've had a couple different thoughts in different shops that I've run in the past, and we either start with a dummy serial number that gets erased with a master serial number, or tied or written for the customer to create a master serial number, or we have the master serial start with the chassis, the core product, and then everything comes to it, gets linked to it. But either way, what you're trying to do as early as possible create a full path, right, about what all these different events that's happening to the system.
So I put together just a quick idea of a serial number that I would have created. So imagine a serial number for a part made today on first shift at 10 a.m. off of cell number 6 by operator 297 using batch of steel
Yeah.
037. That serial number would be something like 25 090 111 006 629 7 S 037, right? But I
I
mean,
hope you're reading that. I'm
I did. I wrote it down. Yeah.
That's impressive. I was thinking in my head and
But I mean, it's the point is you want and Shayna's going to kick us off this slide, I'm sure, but you want that serial number to be unique so that you can
right.
tie it back to a specific component. So and maybe several components then tie into an end item, right?
I
Man,
love it.
and along the way, you're looking at, did I shoot the right number of screws? I'm supposed to have 5 screws and they're all supposed to be torqued to, 2.5 Newton meters. I could be taking pictures. When I finish the process, I used to use vision cameras a lot for color detection, to verify color and stitch combinations for skins. Um, uh, I, uh, I mentioned airbag scoring here, right? That's a fairly sophisticated process, very particular to the auto industry, but safety critical, right? It was
Safety
very important
critical
to
is
capture.
one of the drivers of a lot of traceability, to be
Oh
fair.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of people think about traceability as being that's something that the OEMs and aerospace and biotech all need to do. But I think this webinar, the point of it is, if you take anything away, is there is so much data that you can be capturing to help control your process from a quality standpoint and from a manufacturing standpoint.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
yeah.
So we've talked about the what you should capture in a
Mhm.
couple of different examples.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to jump some slides here. Let's move around to the how. So like, how do you implement this? Talk us through it at the very high level as I'm figuring out to run the slides. Um, how we capture this data, and like, where do you start from? We've seen the maps.
Yeah.
What's the thought process behind it though?
So yeah, I'm going to get back to I already talked about having that foundational type of planning document, a process flow map, and some risk analysis. So that's the base of this pyramid. Those are foundations that, in fact, even if you're going to, do just traceability at a very, very basic level, start there. I tell
Yeah,
everybody start there, and then as you build on that foundation, now you can take things like your your operator instructions, your process control, um, collection, that data collection, that sort of thing. You're going to start to digitize that easily fits right on top of of your foundation. And then from there, we've got things like um, uh, MES control systems that can start to automate that data collection. It can turn on and off devices. It can automatically pull information out of cameras. And yeah, so I mean, you think of it as like I like to think of that as true automation. Not
yeah,
just a robot running in a process, but it's all these other connection points, digital connection points that are capturing that data for you. And then once that data is collected in a very usable way now, right? It's not just buried in paper somewhere in a file cabinet. Now it's actually contextualized. It's actually in uh, ones and zeros in a computer. Then you can really do some really cool stuff with data analytics. That's where AI comes into play, right? When
yeah.
people talk
Dot
about
five is down there. Is you can actually get to AI once you've done the first 4 steps.
yeah. So, and it's
Yeah,
funny,
on the
right?
shop floor at least.
Yeah, you go to conferences and they talk about, the revolution of AI in manufacturing. Well, that's the tip of the pyramid. That's not at the foundation,
Yeah,
right? Start at the foundation. And if you do that, if you build your way through this pyramid, um, you'll understand fairly quickly the benefits of a tool like AI and how it can
I,
help.
I've more than once in my career, as worked across a number of different factories, seeing people to actually start at the top of the pyramid. So someone said, not
Oh,
just
I have to.
provided a vision, but like,
Right,
we're going to go use this system, and then tried to push it downhill. And then 2 years later, they're wondering why their system is failing. Is because they haven't come up from the bottom to understand what they're actually trying to get the system to do.
right,
It's this same happens in robotics. The same happens in a lot of other technologies too. Is if you
absolutely.
don't know
Yeah,
how you're actually going to go build it and the foundations of what you're going to do, then you just bought yourself an expensive toy
yeah,
on the way past.
exactly. Yeah,
Let's jump a little bit on to the second step here of like, why are
sure.
we talking about getting off of paper? Like, I agree as a lean guy that you're supposed to start with everything in cardboard and the thesis, but what's the urgency? What's the benefit for getting people off of paper and getting them actually into a systems
You
approach?
know, that's a great question. So, and I believe me, I've lived the paper life. Um, but you needed it, right? You needed documents to for operator instruction sheets and data collection and that sort of thing. Um, I mean, you had to provide some order to the chaos.
Yeah,
But for um, that, yeah, the push to digitize that is critical because you need to get to a single point of truth, right? You never knew if the operator instruction sheets or this particular control plan or this data you know that I'm supposed to gather, is this the latest version? And then yeah, that's one problem. I mean, don't even get me started, right? But
I've
then
had many manufacturing engineer be a paper chaser.
so, I mean, there were whole departments at one of the plants I worked with. They were called SPC coordinators. I mean, that was, we paid 10 people, $100 grand a year. I mean, that was a while ago, but to chase all this down, right?
Yeah,
And they were filling file cabinets. And then, of course, they were handing me reams of paper and say, "Hey, can you build an
can you
Excel
enter
spreadsheet
this?
to help
Yeah.
us, right, analyze and make a
Six
graph of
months
this
later, you
for
have it
us?"
keyed in, and now you know what you did 9 months ago.
Right. Well, and that's the point is you're capturing all of this data, but it's not actionable, right? It actionable. I mean, it is, but it's delayed, right? You need to
Yeah, I
you need to
agree.
get that data to you where it can help with the decision making process and be actionable in a more immediate way. So
Yeah.
that's why we got to get away from paper.
So that leads us on to the next step. What are some of the easier tools to kind of start that traceability? Walk us through kind of what you see as a couple early
Yeah,
digitization tools.
yeah. So I mean, at an easy level to jump to that next level of in the pyramid. I mean, just simply look at barcodes and barcode scanners. I mean, that's easy and accessible, not expensive, and then like I mentioned before, digital work instructions, right? So part comes into your work cell or what have you, and you start the process. Usually that initiation was done by I scan a barcode, right? And it tells the system, hey, okay, I've got a part, I'm ready to go. Typically, I would lock the part down and and
Runway on you.
yeah, for sure. And then the system knows to start capturing information. So,
Yeah.
and it's bringing up the process sheet that goes with that particular version of the part.
And one of the things that particularly when you start talking about digital work instructions, there's work instructions and then there's digital work instructions. When you
Sure.
PDF a work instruction and put it on a screen,
Yeah.
that's not really a digital work instruction. You've just kind of put paper on glass, as a old
Sure.
colleague of mine used to describe it.
Yeah.
It's not really creating a two-way conversation. I think when we're talking about digital work instructions, it's something that reacts to the operator. And so you're kind of
Yes.
augmenting their capability as opposed to just providing a different format of paper in many
Yeah.
ways, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so, if you had a process step that was you had to shoot 3 screws and you had to, snap this module on and plug these 3 things in, right? As soon as it saw that the 3 screws were shot, it would switch to, okay, now grab this module, right? And you set the module down, and it takes a quick capture, the vision camera capture. Okay, it's in the right spot, and and you scan a barcode, and then it switches to, okay, now plug these 3 items in. So
Yeah.
it's very interactive, and so at a base level, you can do that with digital work instructions, um, and and then from there's some cool technologies out there, and they've been out there for a while. So the prices come way, way, way down, and yeah, that's very
Let's go into
accessible.
those. I mean, let's talk
Yeah,
about some of those because we all talk about Industry 4.0 and industrial Internet of Things and trying to actually
sure.
create a map of all of these things. And like, how do you actually go out and think about, so you've got all these digital devices, what actually is the benefit of them in reality?
Yeah. So the number one here being torque tools. I've been to multi-billion-dollar a year manufacturers that are installing screws with a DeWalt screw gun. And and those screws, I mean, I was pretty, you know, it was a complicated process, and those screws were all hidden. Once the final assembly was done, I was like, okay, well, this process is supposed to have 25 screws. How do you know you put in 25 and not 24? And how do you
I've
know
talked,
that?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
I've
and
talked to
and
three folks in the last 6 months who have all talked about knowing that their customer has to go retighten the screws. So I'm like,
oh,
why
yeah,
don't you just set the
yeah.
screw correctly for them?
Or I've seen customers that then they have like a gated inspection where they have a person that's like taking a white China marker and they're marking every single one. So I mean that's okay, great. You're trying to create a quality control point in your process, but I mean
Yeah.
that's
We used
wasteful.
to do it in aerospace.
Oh
Thousands
yeah,
of bolts. You go over the top of them with the little markers to say somebody. And there's usually a second person coming behind them. You're like,
oh yeah, for sure. And
how do
then
you want to get it done?
I've talked about vision inspection, um, but I mean now cameras are used for. I mean they'll monitor an entire work cell, right? You're zoomed out, and it can track movement. It can track the parts going to scrap bin, whatever. They can track that a door opens and shuts, an andon light comes on, something like that. I mean it's become more than just hey, did this feature get formed correctly? Whatever. Um,
This is one of my favorite uses of shop floor AI currently, because it actually is a real sensor. They can go through and detect where the
yeah.
parts have been put in the right spot, et cetera, et
Yes.
cetera. And then but to the traceability point of view, if it happens in isolation, then somebody's got to come from the front office when a customer calls and complains,
Yeah.
go to the device, download it, and try and figure out how to associate that back. Whereas if you create true traceability, where then you've done a really interesting
Yeah.
station activity, creating that product traceability so that it effectively flows back to that. It's really where that traceability
Yeah.
takes
Yeah.
off.
And well, and I talked about that river of data that's flowing. I mean,
Yeah.
here you've taken a picture, in old manufacturing, I'll say manufacturing 3.0. I mean, that would just get
Yeah.
thrown up onto a hard drive somewhere, right? Now it's interactive, and it's taking it and it's tying it to a serial number, and that is flowing through the process, right? So that genealogy, that digital passport, I think you and I have called it, right? I mean, that's staying with the part electronically all the way through.
Yeah.
Um,
100%.
and then the last, right? We talk about sensors and measurement devices and testers. I mean, looking at, you know, all kinds of stuff, dimensions. I've seen a lot of people use vision inspection where, part comes out of a CNC machine, and you used to have an operator that was measuring it with calipers or micrometers or whatever. Now they
Yeah.
just they set
Is
it
it?
on
Yeah.
in a specific nest, right? And a vision system takes like 50 measurements all at
Yep.
once.
Yeah.
Um, I've got another quick story. I've been to it was a piston manufacturer, piston ring manufacturer, and the
Right.
very end of their process, and this is why traceability is so important and data capture. The end of their process, they had a tester that the part would go in and it's taking a bunch of measurements. And then the operator was literally pen and paper writing down what was on the HMI screen. And I was like, but, and then they would just file that away somewhere.
Got a
And I
piece,
was
another
like,
piece of paper. Yeah.
yeah. And I was like, you're almost there. Just you grab that electronically and get it to
Associate
where
it
it
and
needs
be
to
done.
go.
Yeah.
And now that's where data analytic tools come into play. Now it's, hey, you can see trends, you can see potential failures out there, and you can tie it back to uh, specific components, specific serial numbers. So it's very, very cool.
I love it. I love it. So let's wrap a bow around this part of it.
Sure.
Once you got it, where does it actually take you? So we've talked about the how, we've talked about the
Mhm.
what. Let's put it all together. What does it do for somebody?
Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good point, right? So now you take that information and you got to make it actionable, and that's that next step in the pyramid. Um, it you're using it from a root cause analysis standpoint. You're using it from a data trending standpoint. If you think from an SPC, right, your X bar and R charts.
Yeah.
But again, that data used to all be, like I said, right? It was captured by somebody on paper, and it was, it went into a file cabinet or it went on my desk, right? And I had to then create an Excel file and trend it out or whatever. Those things now, you know, if you're capturing that data real time digitally, that information can almost, it can be then scrubbed back and almost sent back to you in an actual actionable dashboard, a readout, a display, a graph, whatever, in almost real time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And that, to be fair, that's part of the road. So I think what you and I were actually talking about, what started the desire to
Mhm.
just chat further about this, was talking about PMFEAs and DMFEAs and how that FMEAs and how that
Yes.
drove continuous improvement and everything else. So I mean, but there's a whole path that leads people down that. And once you start getting
Yes.
on it, that cycle of continuous improvement, once you have that data, it can take you in a lot of journeys. And that's really
Oh yeah.
one of my favorite AI folks that talked about this from MIT was actually like AI shouldn't displace the human. It should enable the human. So it should
Right.
enable good decision making. It should provide us with data threads and decision points and where do we want to go so you can actually use the human creativity off the back of that. And so,
Mhm.
once you get from the small working off the paper and into the big, it's really an interesting path that comes through
Oh
there.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and if you think about it from like a Six Sigma standpoint, right? And trying to a lot of these problems in manufacturing are complicated. It's not just this happened, so this happened. It's usually small little changes in your process, then finally deteriorated things to where now I finally have a problem. And it's going back and finding all those relationships.
Yeah.
That's if the data is digitized, and especially now you start attaching some data analytics to it and use an AI to help with kind of as your co-pilot. Yeah, it's going to help you identify those relationships, those subtle relationships, much faster, right? So
Yeah.
the ability to control your process. It becomes, it's not this weird abstract idea. It's now, it's
Yeah.
there. It's right at your fingertips.
It's the promise of Industry 4.0.
Yes.
Right where it takes it. So talking of Industry 4.0, some of the
Hmm.
easiest way to get started is kind of where does this take us? And I know I work for Pico, so I push Pico, but one of the key pieces for me is just to start the path. So to your point early on, right? It's just
Yeah.
go out, create the map, see what pieces of data you want to collect, understand how easy it is to collect, and then just link it through to a database system that grabs all that information so that when you do have a problem, you can
Yeah.
retrospectively go back after it. Or if once you get to the point where the firefighting stops, you can go in and look at your data and proactively to see where the next benefit is going. Hone in on your key characteristics, hone in on where you're driving variability across the product,
Mhm.
and actually tighten that down and work your way through some of that. So uh, our next up, we got another poll question for those of you that are still with us. We'd love a little bit
Yeah.
more information out of you. Um, appreciate y'all sticking with us this long. One of the things we want to understand a little bit is what are the challenges you are seeing from traceability? Where do you see the fall down on traceability? Is it just the technology? Don't know where to take that? Is it lack of budget or resources? Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Operator resistance to change. The cultural thing, any change comes along, whether it's traceability, lean, anything, it's it's always there, present, or is it leadership buy-in? And is that just leadership priorities, or is it a leadership lack of focus? Is there leadership? Where do you see your biggest challenges at? I'd love to know a little bit more from the audience.
Yeah.
So mixed result there. So not sure which technologies. There's a lot of
Okay.
noise out there about what technology is available. I agree with
Yeah.
that. I mean, what do you see, Steve?
Oh, same. Yeah. I mean, there's so many technologies out there and they're all competing for your attention and they all say that they're the most critical thing that you can do. Right. I mean,
Yeah,
it's how do you sort through that noise? I
I
understand.
agree. And then the lack of budget and the resources, it's just that time to implement. And
Yeah.
fortunately, as IT and OT are starting to link together a little bit, don't be afraid to try and deploy some of these. They're a lot simpler
Right.
to go after these days than it was. I can remember in 2009, 2010, I deployed my first MES system, and I spent the next half of my life trying to figure out why my MES system wasn't actually running my
I've been
shop
there.
floor.
I've been there. Oh
So,
gosh.
but
Yes.
there's definitely been a lot more traction and kind of come along with it. And then the leadership buy-in is
Yeah.
always an uphill battle. And it kind of can link to that budget too, of like understanding why, understanding how
Yeah.
you're going to justify the finances coming off that. Well,
Well, and I
thanks
think
everybody for providing us. Oh, go on,
yeah,
Steve.
I think it's really important, in response to lack of budget and resources um, is understanding the return on investment, right? So once you've picked a technology and you start to understand what it would cost to implement that, right? I mean, you need to understand, you need to define what the problem is that you're trying to solve, right? And what that problem is actually costing you. And it's not an easy process most times, and that's actually where people like me and Bryan and lots of us who are working, right? Our job is to help you define that and to help you structure that into a return on investment so that conversation is then very easy to have.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Uh, so wrapping it up a little bit, and
Mhm.
just to give the bit of the Pico pitch is we get a lot of those same things that we just asked about the questions. I'm not sure which technology you use. Start simple. Start with a simple barcode. To Steve's
Yes.
point, like it starts your journey of understanding what data it is, and then start looking what that data is. The
Mhm.
lack of budget. There's a lot of technologies out there. Pico has free versions. We have an essential version. It's $100 a month, depending on how you want to deploy it. If you look at some of the complementary technologies, you can get scanners off of Amazon for 50,
Yeah.
$60 to start that.
Oh, yeah.
We partner with Overview, who does an AI enabled camera, and I think they're a few $1,000 right now, but the value you'll get back from them will quickly pay back. And then my favorite is the operators of resistance change. We didn't have anybody put their hand up as that the issue, but making it easy. I had one young high schooler come to me and talking about what Pico was doing, and he said we're gamifying manufacturing. And if that, but it was all of a sudden you
But
saw him
that's
go
true.
from I'm not interested in manufacturing to all of a sudden it's kind of a cool technology and enables that experience, not put
Yeah.
that cognitive burden to your point a minute ago about having to write down everything that came off the CMM. You're like,
Yeah.
this isn't what I signed up to do. If it should already log and stop doing non-value added work, really where it's
Yeah.
at.
Well, I mean, if you think about especially the younger generation as they're coming into the workforce and have been in the workforce for a while, right? I mean, they don't know anything other than a digital life, right? So asking them then to come into your manufacturing process and go back to running your operation the way it was in 1990, right? I mean, that's going to be really foreign to them, right? They are
Right.
very much then going to feel like an outsider, right? So, I mean, it's not easy, but I mean, your business has to grow and become a more digital type of business.
The younger generations, to claim I'm old because I am getting old, um, they're going
Yes.
to demand it. Like that's
Yes.
either they're in or they're not out. And to kind of
Right.
bridge that employment gap, you're going to have some of these tools in place um,
Absolutely.
as you come through it. Well, wrapping up the formal part of it today, we'd love to get you all to put some questions share some questions with us. But whilst we're taking some of those questions, um, if you want a little bit more information, feel free to sign up for our free digital work instructions at picomes.com.
Mhm.
Um, we also worked with Steve, created a traceability implementation checklist for those of you that are trying to do this and just wanted a little bit more information on where to start. Go get that. No strings attached. Just download the checklist, work it. Or Steve's point 5 minutes ago, don't be afraid to reach out and actually
Yeah.
ask some of those questions and start that relationship. There's lots of folks that have this experience. Steve's talked about in 30 years of,
Yeah.
and
That's
and feel free to jump on and join us in the conversation because it is a conversation. It's an evolution.
definitely.
It's an
Yeah.
opportunity for all of us to move manufacturing forward.
Absolutely. And that, and I added number four, earlier this morning, to the slides. We share so much content specific to these types of journeys. Yeah, those things, and follow us on LinkedIn. Absolutely. Right. Because I mean, that just is going to plug you into a much wider world and help with your understanding.
100%. Right. You want to take some questions? Jump over and take a few questions?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So the first question, do you have any examples of ROI benefits experienced by real manufacturers that implemented traceability? Not fake manufacturers, real manufacturers.
Yeah. No. I mean, I have one that I go back to pretty often, and it's not necessarily relatable to a small and medium manufacturer, but it helped us solve literally a multi-million dollar problem. So the Ford F-150, there was a huge recall with warpage that was forming along um, the windshield edge of the instrument panel, especially when they would sit out in the sun. In fact, we would first see it like in cars in Arizona, right? And
Yeah.
you know, it was it wasn't everyone that it was happening to, and it turned out to be a very specific set of circumstances in both the injection molding process and in the ultrasonic welding process. There's ductwork that then gets welded to the backside of this instrument panel, and it helped us narrow down to a very specific set of, literally down to a specific set of hours where a process was running. And so I mean, Ford is making 1,700 F-150s every shift, or excuse me, every day. I mean, that problem, if you were trying to recall, all those vehicles and put in a corrective action, I mean, that's a multi-million dollar problem. So, I mean, traceability got us down to, a very small set and much more manageable, from a monetary standpoint. Again, I get it. That's a big OEM type problem, but I mean, it quickly demonstrates that if you have focus in your manufacturing process,
Yeah.
from a traceability standpoint, the troubleshooting and the root cause and corrective action, I mean, it becomes very quick and it becomes very focused.
Yeah. I my example is pretty direct. We had electromechanical drive systems that were moving
Mhm.
cargo around on aircraft, and it was actually an internal supplier, so ran both factories. We had part traceability, but we didn't have process traceability against all of those parts.
Yeah.
So all the parts were coming from the same group of assemblies. And what it turned out to be is one of the three sub-assembly groups that was injecting the silicone sealant around the device that was vulcanizing actually had something wrong with the device, but it took us about 4 months to actually go back and really granularize all that data that had been mostly paper
Yeah. Well,
and
yeah.
figure out where it was. So we were in panic mode for those 4 months trying to effectively bridge the
Mhm.
gap with all these missing parts. And if we'd had real traceability where we could go back to a very finite level of what the process was doing through those parts, it would have been pretty obvious that like we could have taken 2/3 of those parts and passed them on to the customer because they were
Yeah.
good, and we could have solved the 1/3. I mean, that's almost instant ROI because you had
Yeah.
20 managers and operators running around trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
Let's take another question.
Yeah.
So these are some of the questions that came in advance. First one was, how do I export build data from Pico? I'll take that one quick. So there's a
Yeah.
couple different opportunities at a part by part level. There's a little icon in the upper right that says export my data to the CSV file from the actual data page. So if you go in there, you'll see all the data that we had. Um, and then you can click on that and it should export it. There's also mass exports that we can do through linking to a BI tools. If you have those questions, feel free to reach out to us at support.pico@pico.com,
Mhm.
picomes.com, and we'll get you a little bit more detail if there's a nuance there that we're missing to that question. Um, Next question. What is the difference between industry specific MES solutions, MES embedded in ERP systems, and industry agnostic MES systems? Man, that's a loaded one. Do you want to take a first shot at that one, Steve?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'm going to first tackle the MES embedded in ERP systems.
Yeah,
There's a lot of ERP systems out there on the market, right? And they will, um, I mean, of course, they're helping you control lots of things in your business, right? I mean, all the way
yep,
from order and inventory management, to invoicing, payroll, blah 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 blah. So it's natural, I'll say, that they want to dip their toe into MES type solutions.
yeah,
And, I'll say at a base level, they do some of those things pretty well. The things like digitizing, process sheets and maybe helping with some scheduling and helping with manufacturing planning. Um, but I think that's if you're trying to do a lot of things, you're going to struggle to do all of those things well. That
a lot of
the
those
old adage,
systems
right?
don't actually create traceability. They just provide
Yeah,
a
but
level of interface to the
and
system.
I
Yeah,
understand. I understand why a lot of people will engage the MES portion of an ERP solution, and it's because, and you can probably talk to this better than I. um, Getting those systems, if they were separate, to talk to each other, say 10 years ago, was, well, you needed a team of IT professionals to do
yep,
it, right?
yeah.
And
Create your
it's
own
just,
middleware day. Yep.
and it is, I mean, it is not that way anymore. I mean, these things are meant to integrate well together and share information together, um, and pass information. Yeah. So I think, you can get into some sort of MES solution. Now, whether that's specific to an industry, I'm thinking like biotech or
Yeah.
maybe aerospace. I don't know. Yeah, but
Industry specific ones, they tend to break at a high level for
yeah.
continuous manufacturing versus discrete manufacturing tend to be the two
Mm,
lumps. So continuous are really designed to talk to SCADA systems, talk to
yeah,
PLCs, and function as maybe an interface for the operator to understand what's going on, but not
yeah,
necessarily break into the system. So if you think, paper or chemicals that are going continuously, that
yeah.
those systems, think Aviva, there's some Bosch tools out there that really drive that. And then on the other
Mhm.
side, you have systems like Pico or like Tulip, et cetera, that are designed where you're trying to think about how the operator's experience comes into the play. So it's more augmenting existing operator capability along with
Yeah,
some of the PLC integrations. So it's a really interesting question. All right.
yeah.
I got
Okay.
got a couple more questions here I want to make sure we get to. What are some of the, well, this one's for you. What are some of the pitfalls of getting started with traceability?
Hmm. Yeah, I thought of this one earlier today. Um, I think we touched on it a little bit early
Yeah.
in our webinar here, and it is if you if you don't have at a foundational level the plan, right, then traceability as you start to implement it, it becomes very ad hoc and it becomes well, there's no plan for how you're why you're capturing data at a certain place and and contextualizing it becomes tricky. Yeah, so I would say that's if you don't have a foundation to build your traceability plan from, and then move forward with traceability, and then digital manufacturing, yeah, you're gonna struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. We used to, from a lean point of view, because like I say, I
Yeah,
come from a lean perspective for a lot of my manufacturing experiences. We
yeah,
used to talk about driving inefficiency to try and find the efficiencies. So you're collecting data and you don't know why you're collecting the data. It's sitting there,
yes.
spreadsheet, you're filling in spreadsheets, and all of a sudden you need the data, which is good,
Mhm.
but you're driving a lot of non-value added work just to say I'm collecting data. And so not without knowing the why you're collecting that data,
Yes,
unless you have an automated system that's collecting that data in the background, it does kind of hurt. And it'll potentially create a barrier for the culture to come in and actually go do it. Because then people will be like, well, you're making me waste my time.
for
All right, we
sure.
have
Yeah.
two other questions that came
Okay.
in advance that I want to jump over to quick. How do I digitize my factory to eliminate manual data entry?
Hmm. Uh, I mean, I mean, not a shameless plug for Pico, but I can tell you Pico is one of the best, right, at creating
Thank you.
digital work instructions. And yeah, number one, and we talked about it a few slides ago, that's a great place to start. Um, at an operator interface type level, that's a good place to start. Um,
Yeah.
and
Your
then,
map of like the process of
yeah,
understanding where are all the touch points, and then
yes.
just going to look for the solutions that plug into those.
Yeah, the other place where I would start, and this gets into a little more industry 4.0 technology, is a lot of your equipment. It's already gathering that data, and it'll put it out on a HMI or something like that. So there is th that data
Pull that
stream.
data.
It already exists inside your piece of equipment, and if it doesn't, right? I mean, if you're trying to measure um, current draw, or if you're trying to measure a temperature or something like that, I mean, adding an external sensor and then tying it back to a SCADA device that then can get that information to you in a digital way. I mean, yeah, that's good basic
Yeah.
places
I
to
mean,
start.
we had another question about automating data with smart tools, and
Mhm.
it's that they're interlocked. The more you
Yeah,
understand the simplicity of those smart tools, and then
yeah.
getting that data to something that actually understands the product
Mhm.
movement, so that you're not just collecting point data, you're actually collecting data across the product capability.
Yeah.
I like to think about it. So there's some really good solutions out there that drive deep on process data. Think like
Mhm.
Machine Metrics, Amper, who go deep on CNC machines, or some of the torque tool vendors have some really interesting torque tool comparisons. What
Yeah.
you're trying to do is pull that data and then tie that back to actually the history of your product. Because at the end of the day, that's where the value is being added and trying to kind of work your way through. All right. We have
Yeah.
time for one more question here. And I think this is a really interesting one that you can answer.
Okay.
And it ties to a little bit of kind of like the future of doing more advanced traceabilities. And in the life cycle of a product line, when you see most people implementing, what should they be doing? So when you think about a product, I think if I summarize that, if you think about a product line, how do you think about the full value across that product line as it evolves and creating traceability?
Hmm. Yeah. I think traceability, and we talked about it. Traceability is going to create that digital passport, that genealogy of every part.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and um, that, I mean, it can be stored indefinitely, right? And for products that are out there in the field, especially from a customer service standpoint, being able to, point a customer to a specific serial number, and then they give you that serial number, and then you can easily track that all the way back through your product, and how it was produced. I mean, that's critical. And then, um, you know, kind of a unique, I'll say, implementation of traceability is, for companies out there that produce, I'll say more than just a simple component. They're creating an actual machine. Um, Traceability. I mean, and I liken it to, I mean, on my phone, I have an app for my truck, right? And
Yeah.
and that's tied to a VIN
Yeah.
number, right?
Yeah.
And
It
it's
knows what it's doing.
tracking my oil life, it's tracking, a bunch of information about my truck, and it'll send it back to GM, and GM will say, hey, you know what? It's time for an oil change. I mean, think about that, for, I don't know, something like uh, you know, a dynamic balancing test equipment that you produce, or you know what, $100,000 tree or stump grinder. I mean, being able to just, in a cellular device or something like that, or tie it back to somebody's phone. um, you know,
Yeah.
you can send all that information back to your service center. And I mean, think about, I mean, now all of a
It's
sudden I'm
organized in
speaking.
a way that actually makes it relevant and usable. That kind of
Yeah.
comes across that. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Like,
it's opened up for businesses that can handle it. It's
yeah.
opened up a whole new market. Right now,
Yeah.
it's not just I manufacture the product and it gets sold and I don't think about it ever again. Now it's I can actually help my customers manage the life cycle of that product.
Yeah. We had one more question sneak in here
Sure.
that I want to make sure we get answered. How do you see build your own database systems like smart sheets and jot forms? Alternatively, complementary, are they alternative? Are they complementary, or are they waste of time? So their question is using smart sheets or using a little bit more
Mhm.
sophisticated versions of jot form, et cetera. How do you see that as opposed to a system that interacts?
Hmm. I mean, I've seen a real rise in, I'll call it like, um, it, I'll say almost like intermediary or like middleware type.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, uh, middleware type of technologies. So, a machine, it's going to gather the data and it needs to send it somewhere, and a lot of times it's just going to send this weird string of data off to
Yeah.
your final system, your SCADA, or your MES or whatever. A lot of times there needs to be that intermediary type uh, software, or I'll say middleware, that's going to
Yeah.
help do that translation. So,
Yeah. Sorry.
so no, I don't think it's a waste of time, not at
No,
all.
it's a good place to capture your
Yeah.
data. I think it's again how efficient you want your processes. So you got
Yes.
levels. So early
Mhm.
stuff, put it on spreadsheets. Someone's still got to go iterate with it. The smart sheets point you in the right direction and start helping you create it. And
Yeah.
then the more sophisticated you want to become, go out and reach out. And so it's, how much of your time do you want to spend collecting and analyzing data versus acting on that data?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to tie this bow around this because we're right here at the end of our session. I want to thank everybody that's joined us. Thank everybody that watches this and when we repost it to YouTube. I particularly want to thank you, Steve, for joining me and having a great conversation about
Absolutely,
traceability
my pleasure.
and all the
Yeah.
lead up that came to it. We will be having a survey that will pop up after everybody leaves. We'd love some feedback. Steve and I will look to do a more advanced version of traceability next, and we'd love to get some input from y'all on what you want and where you could use some
Yeah.
help. It's to Steve's point for there of following us on LinkedIn. We're trying to help move the industry forward with a lot of information, also independent of
Yes.
our respective companies, is because we know there's a lot of questions and confusion out there. And so if we can help even and a modicum with that. We'd love to
Yes.
be enabled with some of that. So thanks again, everybody. Appreciate y'all joining us here today. And we look forward to the next webinar.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
See you all next time.